Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Tuesday, November 2nd. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Nebraska game is in 4 days. The game against Michigan in 25 days. Last Saturday's game against Penn State was a big one in the Big Ten East race, but it was also a very important one for the future of the Ohio State football program. It was one of, if not the biggest recruiting weekends of the season for the Buckeyes, and now we're starting to get a better sense for how it went with some of their top targets. My guest today is Buckeye Scoop recruiting analyst Mick Walker. Mick, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Tom. I know when there's some big recruiting stuff, you're going to ask me what's up, and I'm always glad to join.
Yeah, I thought, all right, I just saw Mick write something really interesting on the front page of BuckeyeScoop.com about recruiting. So we're haven't had Mick on for a little while. Good time to have Mick on. So I guess let's start with, who was the person who visited last weekend who you think might have come away with maybe the biggest positive outcome in the recruitment? You know, either this is someone who the weekend really moved the needle for, or someone who it may have tipped over from, considering Ohio State to potentially committing to Ohio State. Like, is there someone that you think might have had the biggest impact on for that weekend might have had the biggest impact on?
Yeah, I mean, if you go, I can honestly go class by this, and there's some guys we talked to, some guys we haven't. Amari Abor, I think getting him back on campus, getting him to see the defensive line and be what it was on Saturday night, I think that helps solidify. But I don't know if how much the scales tipped, because we haven't heard directly from him just about yet. I think in 23, getting Carnell Tate back on was huge. Richard Young was the same. But if you're talking about the guy that this past weekend tipped the scales in the recruitment the most, it has to be Ryan Montgomery picking up an offer on the visit. I mean, this is a guy that's only started a handful of games, just won his first playoff game with Finley this past weekend, and now he's got an offer from Ohio State and Notre Dame in back-to-back weekends. That's game changing in your recruitment. And this is an offer just because it feels needed to justify. This is an offer because of how good Ryan is. It's not because of how good Luke is. It's an offer because of how good Ryan is and how good he could be by the time he becomes a senior. And I mean, he works with the same guy that Drew Aller does, and Brad Mandler is his name, and Brad will tell you that he has every plan and hope and thought that Ryan will be the next Drew Aller to come out of Ohio. And I think that's why you saw Ohio State move on. And yes, having Luke as his brother helps, but Ryan is very talented. And I think when you talk about just game changing his recruitment, it has to be Ryan because of him now having an offer.
Yeah, and just for people who maybe don't know the name, Ryan Montgomery, quarterback out of Finley, younger brother of Luke Montgomery, who is a very, very promising offensive line prospect in the class of 2023. Both of those guys, I mean, Ohio State, Notre Dame, we're seeing a lot of Ohio State, Notre Dame battles. Both of those could end up being Ohio State, Notre Dame battles. Ryan Montgomery has a little time, though. He's in the class of 2025. Yes, 2025. I am not ready to even think about 2025 right now. Let's get it to another guy you talked about a little bit earlier, Carnell Tate. He is in the class of 2023, which is, still seems kind of far off, but, within the realm of reason right now. He is a very talented wide receiver, someone we saw, I think all came away impressed with, after seeing him at camp last summer. He's also someone who has seemingly been close to committing to someone for quite a while right now. He was at Ohio State last weekend. Where do things stand right now with Carnell Tate?
Yeah, well, like you said, the adage is that when a guy sets a commitment date like Carnell Tate did, you set a commitment date with that in mind, you know where you're going to go. And obviously Carnell backed off his date, but he had it in mind when he set his date where he wanted to go. And a lot of people, including myself, thought that was Ohio State. I don't think anything changed over this past weekend to make people think that it wasn't Ohio State. This is an Ohio State and Notre Dame battle, like you talked about. And I was on the phone with, I'll shout them out because they're another awesome independent site. Matt Freeman over at Irish Sports Daily. They do great work covering Notre Dame. And Matt and I go back and forth on a lot of these Ohio State Notre Dame battles. And we both we were talking, exchanging notes a little bit, talking about some of these guys. And Carnell, somebody we came up with, both sort of agreed that Carnell, it still seems like it's an Ohio State Notre Dame battle, and Ohio State from both ends sort of seems like they have a little bit of a lead here. He was up there last weekend, which is something we can talk about. There was about 4, maybe 5 recruits that were at Ohio State this weekend for the Penn State game. They were also at Notre Dame last weekend for the USC game. And just those guys were all together. I think if Carnell watching the product on the field of both games, knowing the relationship he has, I think this is the type of visit that can make him feel comfortable now to possibly set another commitment date or feel more comfortable in choosing Ohio State when that time comes. And that looks like that would be the destination if it came down to him choosing anytime soon.
Well, I mean, it always seemed, back in the day, like it was a lot of Ohio State and Michigan battles. And now it seems like it all seems like it's coming down to Ohio State and Notre Dame on so many of these kids now. And it's not just necessarily the kids from, the Cincinnati area Catholic schools or the, St. Ignatius or whatever up in Cleveland. It's just all over the state. And some of that's probably the Marcus Freeman influence in the state. I mean, that's got to be a piece of it. But, you mentioned the kids who had all been at Notre Dame one week and then at Ohio State the next week. Who were they? Who are some of those other names to know? And do you have a sense for where any of those things stand right now?
To my knowledge, Christian Gray's a guy I think we'll talk about more later, but he might have been at Notre Dame. But to my knowledge, there were for sure 4, and that would have been Sonny Styles, Luke Montgomery, Ryan Montgomery, Josh Padilla, and then also Carnell Tate. So 5, I guess, if you include both Montgomery brothers. Both of them, all 5 of them were at Notre Dame, and they came to Ohio State the following weekend. Obviously, with Sonny Styles, it's a thing that you're sort of looking at the brothers. I mean, he's got his brother there, Lorenzo, who's doing great things. I mean, we talked about Ryan and Luke; those guys go together because they're at a point now where they take family visits. It's not a just take Luke, because Ryan is a serious recruit for all of those. And then Carnell is another guy like we talked about. And preface Carnell, if you look him up, he's going to say IMG Academy. Carnell is a Chicago product, and that's one big reason why you see Ohio State and Notre Dame up there, is because Chicago has typically been a very good area to Notre Dame, and Ohio State has had their fair share of success when they do want to go up in Chicago, obviously having Caleb Brown. Those are the guys, and Padilla is another one who I think we want to touch on more later, because I have a story coming out about him just from talking to him. But those 5 were the guys that doubled up, and I think in the story I talked about with Padilla, he sort of mentioned that just seeing each other constantly those back-to-back weekends, there was conversations between all of them. And it's what happens when you get these peer recruiting guys and the guys that are just in the same class from the same area, and they'll start talking. And I think it's sort of building a sense, and I would not be surprised to see all 3 of Sonny, Luke, and Josh play college ball together. And I think there's definitely conversations about who likes who doesn't like what. And I think that's what you see when you get these like doubled up trips back to back.
All right. So you mentioned Christian Gray. Let's talk about Christian Gray, defensive back. What do you know about him? And he was, you weren't 100% sure if he was at Notre Dame 2 weeks ago. He was at Ohio State this week. So what's the latest on Christian Gray?
So Christian is a very interesting kid, because Mark going back to when Jalen Johnson was at the Smith High School in St. Louis, Mark went back down there, and they told Mark at the time that Christian was a guy that would be the next guy up. And everybody, it's another Notre Dame Ohio State battle. Christian's obviously, with Eli Drinkwitz, is looking at Missouri, because Missouri is recruiting the in-state very well after landing Luther Burden, the 2022 5-star wide receiver. But Christian is a guy that can do a lot of different things. We saw him camp up there this summer, the first camp day with Sonny Styles and all those guys. He moves very well. He's a guy that if you put a weight on him, he can maybe be a Ronnie Hickman. If he stays down where he's at and just maintains speed, he can be a corner. But he's a guy that a lot of defenses are going to love, and that's where you sort of see him on campus at all these different schools. And Ohio State is definitely high up on the list, because he's the guy that is close with not only Jalen Johnson, who was his high school teammate, but Cam Brown, who we got to see have an interception this weekend, and then talked to him after the game. And just, we all know, if anybody who's followed recruiting, when there's high school teammates like that, it's good to have somebody on campus in the year, a little bit of a spy, letting them know how things actually are in Columbus. And Christian really appreciates that. And it's definitely vaulted Ohio State up to another tier, having teammates here.
Yeah, J.K. Johnson hurt right now, but he's someone that the Ohio State defensive coaching staff is very, very high on. So he's someone to watch in the future. So another position that I think there's a position that's been more of a concern. Defensive back recruiting has been going just fine. Offensive line, though, has been a little bit of a concern for people who follow Ohio State recruiting in recent months and years. They did have a big-time prospect on campus last weekend, so let people know about Carson Hinsman and where things might stand with him in the lead up to his decision, which sounds like it might not be too terribly long.
Yeah, if you want the full breakdown, go check out Alex Lightman's piece up. That's going to be on the recruiting section on the front page. Alex has a great relationship with Carson, but there's always been a sort of a thought, and it's been a thought for a while now, is it's Ohio State and Wisconsin. Ohio State, Wisconsin. He's visited both. He's done his visits. He's checked out everything. And it's the same way most people felt about Emil Wagner. It's when Ohio recruitments drag on and they have an Ohio State offer, people say, well, he could have committed to Ohio State a long time ago. Why is he not committed? There's the same flip side that can go, this guy's from Wisconsin. He hasn't committed to Wisconsin. What's dragging on for so long? And I think that's what you're starting to see. And maybe it was just him sort of seeing Ohio State getting another feel. But with both those schools in battling against each other, it's always a good, interesting battle on the offensive line. But as Alex says, I think Carson's feeling closer to a decision. If that came down to Ohio State, I would not be surprised just because how much he's been around Ohio State, how well he knows the recruits, and just the delay to commit to Wisconsin. Because if you wanted to go to Wisconsin, you'd think this guy's been going to games since he was a high school sophomore, and he would know enough to sit there and say, I'm going to Wisconsin by now, and he still hasn't.
Yeah, you're right, and Alex has been killing it this week. We have this is a nice thing about having a nice staff full of recruiting analysts. You can get a lot of recruiting content all in one spot. Alex has been absolutely killing it this week. Another person that I think Alex was the one who wrote about was defensive lineman Keith Sampson Jr. So what's the latest on him?
Yeah, Mark. That was actually, I think we got to give credit to the boss man. Mark got us.
Was that Mark? Okay, yeah,
yeah. Mark talked to Keith, and Keith's an interesting kid out of North Carolina, which we talked about. Eli Drinkwitz in Missouri for Christian Gray. North Carolina, obviously, is an in-state school that's going to play a big role for Keith Sampson Jr. But Keith, like a lot of defensive linemen, you come up, you interact with Larry Johnson, and you fall in love with what you could be under his tutelage. And I think that's what Keith saw. I think that's what Keith felt, getting to see all these defensive linemen do the work that they did on the visit. And he was a guy that was very high on Ohio State after camping. I think he's even higher on Ohio State now. And give credit to where credit's due for the fans. They brought the energy on Saturday night. You could see it on TV. You could experience it. And I think the recruits fed off of it. And Keith's one of those guys that I think, being from a smaller town in North Carolina, getting to go to a place like Ohio State, be in that crowd, was definitely something that caught his eye, on top of being able to work with Larry Johnson in college.
All right, and the last guy I wanted to ask you about was someone that I know you wrote about, which is Adrian Norton. He's an in-state prospect who you talked to earlier in the week. Let everyone know a little bit about him, because that's a name that I don't know. I think a lot of these names people maybe at least have heard. I don't think we've talked a lot about Adrian Norton. So let people know a little bit about him, and then what the latest is with his recruitment.
Yeah, Adrian's a very interesting kid, because I saw him last spring at a camp, and Anthony Brown, who's another 2023 wide receiver that Ohio State's looking at very heavily. Adrian beat him by a step in a race. If Adrian wouldn't have, for some reason, just thought he lost. And Adrian's a very athletic kid. I saw it in the camp, and I think that's what it caught Ohio State's eye. It's what's starting to catch everybody else's eye. He's put up big numbers this year. And when there's guys that are putting up big numbers that have big athletic traits, you're going to see Ohio State. Whether Adrian ends up being Ohio State advocate or not, Ohio State's going to do their due diligence on the in-state guys and see if somebody can perform at the level they did. That's why they offered I don't want to butcher his name, but Austin Sperval. They worked him out of Lakota East multiple times, multiple camps, multiple visits, and they've seen everything. And they eventually felt like he was good enough to help make an impact and win championships at Ohio State. And I think that's Adrian Norton's another guy that they're just sort of in the 2023 class doing their due diligence, doing their homework to sort of see, can he make an impact on winning here in Columbus? And I think that's why you saw him up for the Oregon game. That's why you saw him up for this game. And don't be surprised if we see him pop it, the Ohio State coaches pop into Stevens over there and go check him out in person, just because of what he can bring to the table.
So the last commitment Ohio State got, I believe, was Avery Henry, who is someone you wrote about. Who is someone that you think might be either the next one or one of the next ones to commit to Ohio State? Is there someone maybe from this weekend who was visiting who you think could be, put him on at least commitment watch for the next few weeks or months?
Oh yeah, this CJ Hicks even tweeted about it afterwards. He felt like he got some booms. There's some 2022 kids that have to decide sooner rather than later because of the signing day that's coming up. But the name that, when you ask me that question, comes right to mind is Josh Padilla, who I mentioned earlier. This was Josh's third visit to Ohio State this fall, and I wasn't even sure if he visited Notre Dame and that's what Matt told me. Josh has visited Ohio State a lot and hasn't visited a lot of other places, which is always, when you're a guy like I am, or when you're a recruiting writer, you notice these little things, and the light bulbs go off in your head. And I talked to Josh today, and the story will probably come out before this comes out, but it's not going to come out while I'm talking to you. Josh is starting to feel comfortable in making a decision, looking at it. So if he decides sooner rather than later, don't be surprised, especially considering Wayne's season ended last Friday. And I think he's going to be excited to get the decision done, get into wrestling season, and prepare throughout the spring, get ready for his senior year. And if there was one name you had to say who's the next kid that's going to commit, I would probably go with Josh Padilla.
All right. And if you want to read more about a lot of the players we've talked about, including the upcoming article on Josh Padilla from Mick, and the great stuff from Alex, and the great stuff from Mark, and the great stuff that Bill's put on our Ask the Insiders board this week on his thoughts on the Ohio State game and his thoughts on the college football playoff, and Tony Gerdeman's thoughts. And Kevin Noon had a great piece today. It's all at BuckeyeScoop.com. Fantastic team of writers, fantastic team of insiders. A lot of that content is free to read on the front page of the site, so do make sure you go check that out. And also have a fun chats coming up on the Ask the Insiders board a little later on this week. So it should be a fun week there. And also make sure you check out all of our great podcasts. They're on whatever podcast platform you like. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. And finally, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that bell, subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. You get notified every time we post a new podcast, every time we do a live pregame show, live postgame show, whatever it is. It's all at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.